Alright. You guys broke the law in Mechanus.
If you say so.
Little bit your fault. Little bit
We
your
broke
fault.
a law.
To be fair, it was probably, like, the definition of inevitable is that.
I kind of figured that that's
Wait, are they going
where
to send
you
an
were going.
inevitable after us?
They're going to send a what?
An inevitable?
Is this some Marvel Comics shit?
No,
No,
that's some D&D shit.
that's some
Is it?
D&D shit, man.
Yeah. Oh, they're dumb. I'll tell you all about them later.
They're pretty dumb.
If they're dumb, I don't want to hear about them.
Oh, they're so good.
They came forth with a large contingent of Modrons to take you guys into custody for unlawful discharge of magic. Because you spent the better part of a day just discharging spells to see what they would do. Whereas if you had just gone into the place in Automata and read the books that were on public display, you would have learned what they were going to do.
I don't remember what any of those spells
But
did.
ain't nobody got time for that. That should be you guys' slogan. Ain't nobody got time for that.
Exactly.
Put that on your tombstone. Nobody had time for that.
The tombstone's just empty because we didn't have time to die.
Yeah. Too busy to die.
You're off somewhere else while you're... To your credit, you decided to not resist the large Modron force. They came at you with a Tridrone and some of his Duodrone... I'm sorry, a Pentadrone with some of his Quadrone cohorts. And they were leading Tridrones, who were leading Duodrones, who were leading many, many dozens of Monodrones. And so, by taking them into custody... By taking you into custody, they don't strip you of your weapons or your equipment, first of all. They leave you with those. They don't clap you in irons. They don't put manacles on you. They don't chain you together. They essentially just form up around you, making you march in a line with them. So they have you guys... Well, let's see here. They put Serenity, Mahogany, and Kelian in the front. Riot and Ciclon right behind. And so the five of you are marching like you're a party in Final Fantasy IV.
Yay!
And you're being surrounded by monodrones, the little roundymans with the big eyes in the middle. And off to your right and left as you march on either side is a duodrone who's keeping the monodrones marching in line. Up ahead of you, in front of your unit, is a Tridrone who's in charge of your unit. There's 2 units to each Quadrone, and then there were 3 Quadrones with this Pentadrone who is flying overhead as you march. You march from the gear that you were on to a large cylindrical metal shaft between the gears. And you march along this shaft for a couple of minutes before the Pentadrone at the front of the line issues a command that you don't understand. He's speaking in the Modron language, which doesn't sound like a language to anybody except people in Sigil who say, "Oh, that's the dumbest language I ever heard." But there it is.
He speaks in modem noise, right?
It's like when Nich is worried that his fan is too loud. That's basically what the Modron language sounds like. It's just.
Is it like, you know, the level transfer in Bangai-O? It's just screeching.
It's modem noises, yeah. And when that happens, you see the Pentadrone flies towards the front of the line to turn around and issue this command. And as he's turning back, he blips out of sight. And then you see the front of the line, the front contingent being led by a Quadrone. He disappears out of sight. And then all the Modrons behind him. You're coming up in the second contingent. And as you're going in, your Quadrone blips out of sight. And you guys are a few steps away from this spot where this Pentadrone vanished.
That seems fine. I'll head through.
Okay.
Okay. Now, when you say you head through, are you going to break the line and try to get ahead, or are you just going to keep marching?
No, I'm just going to keep marching. It sounds fun.
Okay. Oh, you know what? I think my volume levels are messed up. Nope, they're fine. Okay. I tricked myself into thinking I was less competent than I was. So after a few more moments, the monodrones in front of you, one by one, as their line converges on this point in space, they vanish. And then you guys enter. And one moment you're looking at this long metal cylindrical shaft that you've been marching on. That looks like it disappears hundreds of yards in front of you into another giant gear, which you thought you had been headed towards. The next moment, it's like when your webcam freezes up and then starts coming back into focus and it leaves all that artifacting on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
You have a visual sensation very similar to that, where the world around you locks in place for a moment and then begins to kind of pixelate and swirl inward. And before you know it, you're enveloped in just a massive, chaotic swirl of colors, kaleidoscopic light. And before you can even blink or adjust your eyes, you're back on a gear somewhere, with all the Modrons marching ahead of you. And looking around, you don't recognize anything around you. You are in a completely different space.
Okay.
So what does this completely new space look like?
Just more Mechanos. But now instead of marching along a long cylindrical metal shaft, you're marching along the surface of one of the gears of Mechanos.
Are we spinning?
Are you spinning? You never have the sensation of spinning in Mechanos. It looks like everything else is in motion, but the gear you're on, relative to you, is motionless.
Does anything stand out?
That's
Anything unique that we haven't seen before? Or is it just more Mechanos gears?
Mostly more Mechanos gears, but far in the distance you do see, excuse me, you do see more life than you saw in the space where you showed up. You see what might be construed as not a Modron village. They don't have villages or settlements, but a group of monodrones mostly, on a nearby gear, tending to something. And you see a few patches of those off in the distance.
What's like directly in front of us? Like, what are we being marched toward?
The edge of the gear.
Okay.
And after a few moments, you come to the edge of this gear. I'm sorry, the Pentadrone leading the three contingents comes to the head of the gear, disappears around it on the other side. The Modrons continue to march over the edge to the back side of the gear.
All right.
Oh boy.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
By the time you guys reach the edge of the gear, you hear the same command being issued below you, where the Pentadrone is reached. And by the time you come around, now marching back towards the center of the gear, the same thing is happening. These contingents are marching, converging on this point of space near the center of this gear, and vanishing.
I look at Ciclon next to me and says, "We're never going to get back to where we were, are we?"
Probably not.
Where we were was terrible. Once we
Or-
beat this trial, we can use magic all we want. That's double jeopardy.
I don't think it works that way.
They also might not have that on Mechanos.
Mahogany squints at Kelian. He goes, "Are you sure?
I don't know. I didn't read
Is this
the
like
rules.
taxes?"
I'd have to read the rules to be sure.
There was a question last week about what Haven is. And I looked it up. Haven is a town that you might have heard about in Sigil. Because it is the one place on Mechanos that is controlled by entities outside of the Modrons or the governors. Haven is a place that people live there. They want to be lawful. They want to live in cadence with the plane, but they don't want to get too extreme with it. Kind of like how Pandemonium had that little safe house you guys bunkered down in. That's essentially what Haven is. That's a place where travelers can go and stay for a while and not be harassed by the most zealous aspects of the plane. Okay. Unfortunately, there are no easily accessible or no known portals that go directly to Haven from Sigil. If there are, the governors keep them under tight control. I'll leave it up to you guys whether you want your individual characters to know about Haven or not. So,
That I would.
a second time, you're marched to the center of this gear, and once again, the world kind of collapses in on you. Your vision gets swirly again, and for a moment you're in this tunnel of kaleidoscopic light. Beautiful, just light and color around you, the exact opposite of what you imagined Mechanos to be like. And once again, just before your eyes even adjust, now you are marching along the rim of a large cog.
Eh.
Like if you look up in the top left corner of this map here, this like hollow-looking gear, you're marching along the rim of one of these. And this process repeats itself several times. And you see many different sights as you move through the plane of Mechanos. I mean, you see gears that have been cultivated, farmland for the mortal denizens of the plane. You reach places where, if you didn't know you were on Mechanos, you couldn't guess. Because
Do we see the Dothraki Sea, the ocean?
The Dothraki Sea is in Game of Thrones, and it's not an ocean, it's a plain.
Well, we're on a plane, so do we see the ocean?
Nodal, I love you like a brother, but do not get Game of Thrones wrong in my presence.
The place we're trying to get to is the Kodrashi Sea.
Yes, it is,
Oh,
the
okay,
Kodrashi
great.
Sea. You don't see the Kodrashi Sea. In fact, the bodies of water that you do see are very clearly artificial. As you and Serenity probably well know, none of the big like multi-planar bodies of water touch this part of the Great Wheel. No rivers flow into Mechanos, and Bobrick has informed you that the only known ocean is the Kodrashi Sea, which is encased in a gear made of ice. But you do see what you assume what would have to be artificial pools, perfectly circular, with sometimes you see people fishing the waters in boats sitting at exact right angles to the dock, and then their pole is sitting in exact right angle to the boat.
Is the fish perfectly spherical?
You can't see the fish. But you do see these bodies of waters mostly for irrigation purposes, practical purposes, washing farmland, and it kind of surprises you. This is not what you expected. There's places, as you're traveling with this Modron contingent, at one point you're like, this isn't Mechanos. We've hit Arcadia at this point. We're marching along a road. There are trees on either side of us. They're forming perfect straight lines. If it were not for the lack of a sun overhead, you wouldn't know. There are other places you pass through that have weather, clearly artificial weather. You're looking in the sky, storm clouds are dropping rain onto the land. Looking up, the storm clouds form fractals and bizarre symmetrical geometric shapes high in the sky. And if you were to carefully measure the rain, you would probably be able to discern the exact geometric pattern that each drop is hitting the ground. Before long, though, you reach Regulus. This giant gear on the map. This is the realm of Primus. And when you reach this, you leave behind the several pastoral scenes that you saw, and you know that you've reached your destination. This is after 10 or 12 trips through that kaleidoscopic tunnel.
Okay.
And you're marching to this large, enormous... at first, in the distance, you're thinking it's a mountain. But as you get closer to it, you realize it's just an enormous building. A building, the structure of which would be impossible in Sigil. It would just collapse under its own weight. You can see an incredibly far distance on this plane, but you can't see the top of this building. And as you get closer and closer to it, you reach a point where you can't look and see the sides of it either.
Wow.
And as you get closer still, you begin hearing things from it. You begin hearing the movement and the din of machinery from inside, an impossible amount. And they're marching you towards these enormous double doors, these enormous metal doors that stand open, guarded with Modrons in front. And the Pentadrone at the front of your procession turns, gives an order, and the procession comes to a halt. And then you wait, and you can't hear what it's saying, and you can't hear any language from it for the din of all this machinery inside of this building you've been brought to.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if if I'm remembering right, there's 3 units of Mojons, right?
Yes.
And we're in 1.
You're in the middle of the 3, yes.
Did they stop at any point to take like other lawbreakers, or are we the only unit with prisoners?
You are the only unit with prisoners.
Okay.
Your middle unit, and they didn't stop for anything the entire trip. You guys haven't been marching long though, less than an hour easily. And after a few moments, you see the Pentadrone turn, say something to the nearby Quadrone. The Quadrone marches up to the Tridrone at the head of one of the Tridrones at the head of your unit. Says something to him. The Tridrone comes to where you're standing, and you can hear the Tridrone speak to the Duodrone next to it. And he says, the prisoners are to be made aware that trial preparations are underway. At which point the Duodrone turns and speaks to the Monodrone right next to you and says, the prisoners are to be made aware that trial preparations are underway. At which point the
turn towards
Monodrone...
Riot and say, I think trial preparations are underway.
And the Monodrone repeats that statement, at which point the Duodrone gives it the command to fall back in line, and then it does.
So if I was to ask the Monodrone, what do we do while we're waiting for the trial to be prepared, would it have to then ask the Duodrone, who would then have to ask the Tridrone, who would then, etc.?
Do you try it?
Sure.
What do you ask?
What are we supposed to do while we're waiting for the trial to begin?
And it's like talking to furniture. Monodrone does not give any appearance that it even understands it's being talked to.
I'll try repeating it to the Duodrone then.
Okay. Which one? The Duodrone that just conveyed the message, or the one standing on the other side of your unit?
The one that just conveyed the message.
Okay. At this point, the Tridrone has taken his leave and is going back up to the front of the line. The Duodrone turns and says, replies to you, that further instructions will be along shortly.
How long is shortly?
And the Duodrone says, further instructions will be along shortly.
I was kind of hoping you'd give me a precise second.
And the
We actually
Duodrone
didn't
says,
get any instructions yet.
further instructions will be along shortly.
So they can't be further instructions. They just have to be instructions.
And this conversation goes on for as long as you want it to.
Ciclon is having none of it.
So what is Ciclon doing?
Ciclon is just he's not
Side
pacing
deeply.
around. He's not pacing around. He's looking really anxious. He's looking back and forth to the various Modrons, and he's just like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And he's trying to come up with a plan.
Ciclon, you want a book?
No, I already have one, thanks.
Riot just whistles a happy tune to herself.
Okay. How happy are we talking here?
Pretty chipper.
Pretty chipper for somebody who's about to be executed by Modrons?
Sure.
So that's like not super chipper, but like just by comparison.
You guys wait in this large procession of Modrons for what seems like much longer than the march here. Before, once again, the Pentadrone, who has not moved from the front of the procession this whole time, is met in the doorway by another Pentadrone from inside. You see them converse for a moment. Then your Pentadrone turns, gives instruction to one of the Quadrones, marches back to the line, gives instruction to one of the Tridrones, who marches back to your position and tells the Duodrone, the prisoners are to be instructed that their case will be handled by the Fraternity of Order. And the Duodrone turns around, explains to the Monodrone standing to your left, the prisoners are to be instructed that their case will be handled by the Fraternity of Order. At which point the Monodrone turns around and addresses you all and says, the prisoners are to be instructed that their case will be handled by the Fraternity of Order.
You should do that then.
And then the Monodrone turns back around, the Duodrone instructs it to fall back in line, and so it does.
So how are we with the Fraternity and Order right now?
The
Kelian.
Good question. So let's actually get that out of the way real quick. I think I know how this is going to go, but let's start with Ciclon, because I think he will give the least hostile answer. How is Ciclon with the Fraternity of Order, just in general?
No strong opinion one way or the other.
Okay. What about Mahogany?
Although spending all night doing paperwork, that was kind of a pain in the balls. That not quite into like I'm not gonna pull the renegade trigger, but
but you'll put your finger on it. You'll be like, just do one more little thing.
Yeah, just one more thing.
What about Mahogany? How's Mahogany with the governors?
Well, every faction has something to provide in Sigil.
Mm-hmm.
He hasn't especially seen any good that the governors have provided, but I mean, maybe this is their purpose.
But you're not in Sigil now.
Right, but they have something to provide in the multiverse.
What about Kelian? Well, now Kelian used to work as a clerk for the Fated, which means he often worked at in close tandem with the governors. Because all of the taxes that he collected were, of course, governed by laws in Sigil.
Sure.
So what is Kelian's take on it from that perspective? Are they a necessary inconvenience? Or are we just better off without them?
There's nothing the Takers couldn't do that the Fraternity of Order couldn't, like there's nothing the Fraternity of Order provides that the Takers couldn't do.
So you think that the Fated should be running the court?
Yeah.
Is there any headquarters in Sigil you think the Fated shouldn't be running?
Those ciphers like the gymnasium, so whatever.
Okay. So it's not that
we should let you in.
It's not that the Fated should take over everything and run every aspect of Sigil. It's just the governors in particular. If the Fated were in control of the courts, like, they wouldn't have their fingers in your business anymore. Is it from like that aspect?
Yeah.
Has Kelian ever done anything in capacity as a clerk for the Fated to try to undermine that kind of governor agency in Sigil?
I don't
Like,
think so.
Like, for example, like fixing the numbers on your edge and to make sure that, like, a governor business gets appropriated by the Fated after not paying taxes.
I don't think... I don't think Kelian would play that way.
Okay. What if an order came down from Torier to do that?
Yeah.
He would?
You'd probably listen to that.
Riot was thinking about joining the governors at one point, wasn't she? Like, she was that close?
Yeah. The governors are not the worst faction in Sigil. They're only the third worst.
That's fair.
Behind who?
Behind the Harmonium and the Mercy Killers.
Oh, okay. So Harmonium are definitely the worst.
So where do the Takers
It's
fall?
kind of a toss-up between the Harmonium and the Mercy Killers.
It's
Now-
whoever's annoyed her most recent.
No, and there's a reason for that, because the governors, as terrible as they are, would be toothless without the enforcement wings of the Mercy Killers and the Harmonium.
So, and in Sigil, those three factions work in very tight conjuncture with another as, like, judge, jury, and executioner.
Right.
So, in Riot's perspective, like, are any of these three factions required in Sigil? Are they required to work together? Or would it be better if some of them were disbanded? Like, would the courts be able to function without a police force? And if so, are the courts still something that are desirable?
No, the courts, they absolutely would not matter if there was no one to hand down the sentence and carry out the sentence.
Okay.
So, the Harmonium are the worst because they enforce their own ideal on everybody else. It starts with Harmonium, so they're the worst.
Mm-hmm.
It passes through the governor's courts, but the governor's courts wouldn't matter if there were no Harmonium to bring lawbreakers to them and no prison to put the lawbreakers in.
Okay. if you guys
On their own, the governors are harmless. Since they are not on their own, they are the third worst faction in Sigil.
Okay. If any of you guys were in this situation in Sigil, about to march in and be put on trial for a crime you committed in Sigil, we know what would happen we know what happens when one of the factions attempts to take justice into their own hand because you broke in and got Serenity out. If you guys were going through the proper channels in Sigil, being marched into court, would that be something that your character would resign themselves to? Would you allow yourselves to go through the proper channels, or would you attempt to escape?
In Sigil?
In Sigil.
That's a tough question. I think Kelian would probably try to escape.
Yeah, Riot would wait for the moment when she was out of Harmonium custody and had been passed into the care of the governors for the court, and try to escape then.
Okay.
Oh, Mahogany would just leave. He'd be out.
We'll just leave.
They're clearly overreaching if they've arrested him.
So Mahogany doesn't necessarily even recognize their authority over him in Sigil.
Well, I mean, if Mahogany were to do anything worth being arrested, of course they could arrest him. But why would he do that? I don't understand.
Some very Modron logic right there.
So let's talk about Modron logic for a second, because you guys are not in Sigil. You're on Mechanos. Are the governors as toothless in Mechanos as Riot perceives them to be in Sigil without their muscle?
Well, clearly not, because they have muscle here. If they hadn't sent 100 Modrons after us, then we wouldn't have bowed to their authority.
Okay.
It's the same situation here as in Sigil. The governors are toothless without muscle to back them up, and they have that here, just as they have that in Sigil.
Okay. And these are all things that the five of you are able to muse on a little bit as you're standing waiting for further instructions.
Well, Mahogany hasn't seen any proof yet. He's going to say in response to that the governors are the ones who are having stuff enforced for them here. The Modrons seem to be in charge. All we've been told is that the governors are defending us.
That's true.
No, they didn't say that. They said that they will be handling our case. They didn't say that they'd be defending us or prosecuting us.
And as you're musing over all of this, standing and waiting, eventually an order, the Pentadrone at the front of the line gives an order, which the Quadrone next to him turns and repeats. And you see the Quadrone at the head of the first unit and the unit in front of you turn around. The order filters down through the Modrons until they reach the Monodrones around you. The next thing that happens is all of the Modrons, the 100 or so, and all three of the units that comprise the procession that brought you here, break up and begin to scatter and begin to go about other business, leaving you standing very much alone in the base of this enormous building. And as this happens, the Pentadrone who originally gave the order, he waits a few moments, watches his underlings begin to disperse. Then he and his Quadrone begin walking in your direction.
All right.
I think it's time to start looking around for an exit.
For an exit?
Yeah.
Make me a Wisdom 10.
Okay. I passed.
You passed. This unimaginably large tower in front of you, this huge metal spire that stretches above you to a point in space you can no longer see. You assume, judging by everything you've seen since you got to Mechanus, that this is the center of a gear. And looking in all directions behind you, you can't see around the tower. The tower takes up your entire field of vision up front. But looking behind you, where you were marching from, the copper gear you're standing on stretches away in all directions, and you cannot see the edges of it. Unless you can teleport, your exit involves a chase.
How would we be able to teleport?
Yeah. All right then.
So Riot's looking around as this Pentadrone approaches, and he and his Quadrone come up, and he issues a command, and the Quadrone turns to you all. And it's a very disarming moment being spoken to by a Quadrone, because like I explained last session, these are the ones most likely to become rogue Modrons. All the Modrons you guys have ever rubbed elbows with in Sigil have looked like this guy, basically, but he's not talking like they are. He's soulless. He's an automaton. He has no personality, no emotion at all. He's just coldly reciting the orders he was given.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that you will be met shortly by Lois Vesterhoff, who will be your defense agent in the proceedings that will determine the manner of your execution.
Raz says, "Wait, I don't understand. Is there a monodrone you can tell that to?"
And the Quadrone just kind of blinks in confusion. Doesn't
A
understand.
Tri-drone and then a Duo-drone and then a Myo-drone. Riot.
Yeah. What
And
happened to the chain of command here?
He says that issuing the command to a Tri-drone is not necessary because the prisoners are more than capable of understanding the common tongue, in which this one is well versed.
There's your answer. Any more smart ideas?
Makes sense to me.
Are you seriously asking?
That seems like a reckless idea. No one's asking, Riot. Not
Okay.
yet.
And he explains that you all will be permitted to keep your possessions and your weapons during your stay in Regulus. He says that quarters are being prepared at the moment, and that is what's taken up so much of this time. He says once the quarters are prepared, they will escort you there to await the trial that will determine the manner of your execution.
Okay.
Not whether we should be executed or not?
Well, it could be executed by old age.
And Riot asks that, and again, the Quadrone doesn't seem to understand the concept of what you mean. He explains that clearly, having been found in violation of the laws, ergo, he's saying he's very coldly and emotionlessly, ergo, the lot of you are to be executed.
Kelian looks at the Pentadrone.
The Pentadrone is simply standing there in his weird flower-looking status on his 5 legs, and he's regarding the conversation that's happening, but he considers himself to be above taking part in it.
How many people are currently waiting to be executed?
And the Quadrone replies that that information is not necessary to be held by the prisoners.
Ray asks, so we're here to find out how we're going to die, right?
And he just repeats that the trial will determine the manner in which you will be executed.
And if we try to run, then we'll definitely die, right?
And the Quadrone says that this one would highly recommend against any attempt at egress.
Because he'll kill us.
He says that the manner of execution will be determined much more harshly if attempted escape is added to your list of charges.
What kinds of executions are there?
He says this can all be explained to you when you meet with your defense agent, Lois Vesterhoff.
All right.
And after he seems satisfied that he's answered all of your questions, he and the Pentadrone have, I'm going to say conversation, but conversation's not really the correct word, like two modems blinking at each other for a second is more what happens here. But after that happens, the Pentadrone turns and starts headed back towards the great building, at which point the Quadrone just turns and faces you all and is now standing guard, as though he's waiting further orders. So how does Riot attempt to escape?
Well, it seems like the first step in the process is figuring out how to turn this Quadrant rogue.
Okay.
That was also Kelian's thought.
Okay,
I'll tell you what.
Adamant McDohl is intrigued.
I will give you guys a couple minutes to think about that because I got to run to the fridge and pour myself some limonada,
I gotta go to the bathroom.
and I'll be right back.
So, are we going to Captain Kirk talk a computer into insanity? Is that what's going to happen?
I really want to.
I'm just really glad that we all had the exact same plan for dealing with this situation. Like, we knew what had to happen.
Riot sees she's confused it twice. Just needs to keep hammering away at that.
I was wondering how many people are on list to be executed who just leave.
Yeah.
Because, like, oh yeah, we'll get executed by fire in 100 years. We'll worry about that then.
So, any thoughts?
Well, let's ask him, some of the classic paradoxes.
I'm picturing that scene in Portal 2 right now. That scene, you all know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
So what does Riot do to turn this Modron rogue?
She's gonna tell it a story about Tasbit.
Okay.
Say, I knew Modron a lot like you. Back on Sigil.
And what story do you tell?
The story of how he is currently spending his days pouring through the fest hall, looking for new experiences that could not be found on Mechanos.
On a scale of 1 to 10, like how flowery and enticing is Riot getting with this story?
I feel like we should roll performance for this.
No roll is going to be required.
Okay.
Just on a scale of 1 to 10, like how?
She's playing it up, trying to make it sound like he is living the most fulfilled life a Modron could have out there in the fest hall.
Okay. And you tell this story of your good friend Tasbit.
Mhm.
And the whole time, the Quadrone listens very intently. He's not like the Monodrones or Duodrones that have been bringing you here. When you speak to him, he turns to you. He gives you eye contact. He regards what you're saying. And at the end of your story, his reply is, the individual of which you speak is not a Modron.
I think your classification might be an error there.
So that's an interesting subject. Let's talk about that. See, we have this guy Kelian here, right? It's my friend Kelian.
Kelian
And
waves.
I motion toward him.
And the Quadrone regards Kelian for a moment.
Kelian here is a member of the Fated. You might know him as the Takers. He wears their badge. He holds their ideals. Curious thing about Kelian is he's out of his faction's good books. They kicked him out, took away his home, took away his job, took away his titles. At the same time, Kelian's still a Fated. Nobody can tell Kelian he's not a Fated. Only he can decide that.
To which the Modron looks at Kelian, and he says, "Good day, Kelian. Unfortunately, this one should inform you that you are also not a Modron."
Well, let me ask you this. What makes a Modron?
This one regrets to inform you that there are not words in the common tongue. And then he gives an explanation of what makes a Modron in the Modron language.
Kelian covers his ears.
Now, it's the same. My friend Tasbit is a lot like my friend Kelian. If I was to go up to Tasbit, if I was able to get back to Ciclon and say, "Hey, Tasbit, are you a Modron?" He would say, "Well, yes, I am."
And he says, "I regret to now inform you." He says, "This one regrets to now inform you that your friend Tasbit is misinformed as to the nature of a Modron. The creature you describe cannot be a Modron."
What is he then?
He
And
came from Mechanus. He has your boxy shape. He has your wings, your arms. He looks exactly like you.
Tasbit doesn't have wings.
Oh, he doesn't? Okay.
Yeah, in fact, you've seen rogue Modrons with wings before, but they tend to be aftermarket editions.
Ah.
It may have been explained to you by Tasbit before that a true quadrone, like the one standing in front of you, has 4 limbs. 2 arms and 2 wings. Whereas a rogue Modron only has 2. Whether or not that makes a big difference to Riot, I'll leave that to you to decide. But some rogue Modrons do have their arms manipulated to become more wing-like in structure.
I'll skip over the bits that make Tasbit different from this Modron.
Okay.
And I'll just emphasize the similarities.
To which the Modron begins a philosophical discussion about how similarities between 2 objects do not necessarily mean an equilibrium between 2 objects. 2 things that are alike are not necessarily the same. Mm-hmm. And it also regrets to inform you that it understands your inability, your lack of capacity to understand the law. And it is that lack of capacity that leads you to believe that things are Modrons when they are not.
How well do you understand, I wonder? Have you ever really tried to understand somebody's lack of ability to understand the law?
And it says that your lack of ability to understand the law is self-evident. I mean, evidence is you're standing here apprehending the Modrons for breaking the law, ergo, you did not understand the law. What is Ciclon doing while these guys are harassing this poor Modron?
Ciclon, he's watching this and he's like, okay, have they got an angle? Do they look like they're swaying this guy? And it's sounding like that they're not.
I'm not going to say that it seems to be enjoying the conversation, because Ciclon, you don't see any, and you don't see enough emotion or individuality in this thing to enjoy much of anything. But it's not blowing them off. It's addressing their concerns. It's having a real discussion with them, answering their questions. They're not just getting the same answer the way they were with that duo drone a few minutes ago. At the same time, though, yeah, go ahead.
No, I wanted to ask the Modron.
Okay. At the same time, though, Ciclon, I mean, there's no indication whatsoever this Modron is budging.
So I'll ask it, have you ever heard of the spell called Zone of Truth?
Give me one quick second.
It's a wizard.
This is one of those spots where I don't have the entire canon of Planescape memorized, so I don't know if a quadrone would know about magic at all or not.
I'm never like expecting you to have all of the canon of Planescape memorized. I am always surprised when there's something about a Modron you don't know.
There's a lot. Well, the thing is there's a lot about Modrons, and the Hierarch Modrons aren't in 5th edition yet. We are getting a new monster book in November, and I really, really, really want Modrons in there.
It's bizarre that they're not, given that they put them in the player's handbook.
They put the base Modrons in the player's handbook, and they talk about the hierarchs in the player's handbook, or not the monster manual, but they don't have like stat blocks or anything. The hierarch Modrons, the Pentadrone is the strongest form of base Modron. That's the strongest one we have stat blocks for. Above that, though, hierarch Modrons eventually get spellcasting abilities and such from Primus. The problem is a quadrone cannot conceive of a hexadrone or anything above that. So when you ask about
Zone, know what a wizard is.
It doesn't. It has no idea. Doesn't know magic exists. Because
then how are we? If it doesn't know that magic exists, what are we on trial for?
Because this quadrone was not the one that accused you.
Yeah.
That accusation came way above his head.
Okay.
Like a kid could be handing out leaflets in front of the court. That's who you're talking to, basically. So you
That's
ask
what
it if it
push on then.
You ask it if it knows about Zone of Truth, and it says in response that speaking untruths is a grave violation of the laws of Regulus and Mechanus as a whole, and that this one advises you and your number to avoid speaking untruths. For it would not be well to have that added to your list of charges.
I wouldn't dream of it. But let me tell you about what the spell does. Back on where I'm from, my home plane, Sigil, there's no law against speaking untruths. Everybody does it, all the time. So there's a spell that you can cast, and if the person you cast it on agrees to it, then it prevents magically them from being able to speak any untruth. Just can't happen. Do you understand?
And it says, this one laments that there are places in the multiverse where untruths are spoken so freely.
But not under the zone of truth, you see. Under the zone of truth, only truth is spoken. That's the concept I'm trying to get across to you.
He says, delightfully, the 5 of you have now come to Mechanus, and will no longer have to endure such trials and tribulations of the other planes.
I thought we were here for trials and tribulations.
Where I'm going with this is, if you were to cast Zone of Truth on my friend Tasbit, ensuring that he could no longer speak any untruth, and you would ask him, are you a Modron? He would say yes.
To which he replies, ignorance is not an untruth. Any more questions for the Quadrone?
Nah.
Okay. You stand there in silence for another minute or two, and he very suddenly claps his 2 hands together, and he says, it has been 34 minutes. I am now instructed to escort you to your quarters. And he motions to the large double doors, still open, still flanked by quadrones on either side. And each of the quadrones there have 2 tridrones. And each of the 2 tridrones have 2 duodrones. And each of the 2 duodrones have some number of monodrones standing guard at these doors. And he motions for you to follow him inside.
Okay.
Yeah.
He takes you into the main spire of Regulus, into these enormous echoing halls, and you see Modrons, the types of which you've never even conceived of. You've certainly never seen them in Sigil, in such bizarre shapes and sizes, and all around you. And no small number of mortals either, humans, mostly humans, several dwarves, no small number of halflings, and what you presume to be Aasimar here and there, as far as the demi-human races go. And you're brought inside, and for a moment you think the giant, this cavernous, echoing room that you're in, is the entirety of the tower, like this entire superstructure inside. But eventually, he takes you up and down some layers of stairs. He takes you up an elevator that he uses a metal chain to lift. Takes you down a couple more maze-like hallways, twists and turns. I will let everybody make, if you desire to, I will let everybody make an intelligence check, DC 20, to attempt to remember how to get back to the door.
I'll make that
For
check.
your future escape plans, of course.
Yeah.
Not wisdom?
Yeah.
Intelligence.
Kelian
I failed.
makes it. 20 on the button.
20 on the button.
19. I'm just off. Just
I
off.
fail.
Okay, so Kelian, you remember the path that you take to get to the quarters. And when the Quadrone arrives at the door, there are already 2 tridrones stationed outside of it. 2 of the upside-down pyramid guys with their spears outside of it. And the Quadrone gives them orders in the Modron language, then turns to address you and says that these tridrones will be standing guard over the exit. If you have need of anything, please do not hesitate to make your needs known to them, and they will fetch me, and I shall fulfill them. And then he beckons you inside.
Go inside.
And it looks like a pretty nice layout in here. Kelian, it's similar to the room that you couldn't afford after you got kicked out of your house. Like, you had to settle for, like the dumpy room. The penthouse suite above you, this is what this looks like.
Gotcha.
It's a large common room, perfectly symmetrical. It has a rectangular table in the center with foodstuffs on it. A decanter of water, one of what looks like cream. Various foods, nothing spectacular. Salted meats, some dried fruits, all perfectly laid out to be symmetrical and at right angles to each other. Nothing out of place. 6 chairs, 3 lining each side of the table. Beyond that, there are 2 large sofas to lounge on. And beyond that, there are 4 doors, one on each side of the opposing walls. And the Quadrone brings you in, tells you that the meal has been perfectly calibrated to suit the tastes of visitors from the outside planes. Motions that the 4 rooms are bedchambers for personal use, and says that you all are confined to quarters until called for your trial.
Before you leave, we have need of freedom. You said you would provide us with anything that we needed.
And it doesn't understand what you're asking.